Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says his state doesn't welcome the Chinese Communist Party. A look at his newest move to counter Beijing's influence on American soil. From blasting lasers to a floating barrier, what's the latest on tensions in Asia's most disputed waters? And an SOS from a Taiwan airport.
I wanted to seek political asylum in the United States, but I couldn't.
A Chinese activist fled to the island after being detained by police in China over a social media post. What's next for him? What do you think? Let us know below and subscribe if you haven't already. The Chinese Communist Party is not welcome in the state of Florida. That's what Governor Ron DeSantis said in an announcement to cut funding to 4 schools. They all have alleged ties to the CCP. Here's more.
It found that schools in Weston and Winter Park maintain direct connections with the CCP. The governor's office said the schools associations constitute an imminent threat to the health, safety, and welfare of students and the public.
The Chinese party trying to undermine not only the view of America, it's communism's great, capitalism is bad, but it's also undermining our very institutions to try to talk about the Communist Party actually creating a valid government that actually benefits the Chinese people, rather than our students should be hearing that capitalism is great.
DeSantis signed a law in May that prohibits any school affiliated with a foreign country of concern like China from taking part in the state's school choice scholarship programs. The directive to suspend the schools from the program is part of the state's ongoing efforts to distance itself from any influence of the Chinese Communist regime.
Lasers, water cannons, and now a floating barrier. China's dispute with the Philippines is heating up. Chinese Coast Guard troops have been spotted laying ropes, nets, and buoys to block Filipino fishermen, an attempt to keep them out of a disputed part of the South China Sea. Let's take a closer look.
The Philippines on Sunday accused China's Coast Guard of installing a floating barrier in a disputed area of the South China Sea. Footage released by the Philippine Coast Guard showed several Chinese vessels near the barrier, which Manila says is preventing Filipinos from entering and fishing in the area. A spokesperson said the Philippine Coast Guard and the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources strongly condemn the installation of the barrier in part of the Scarborough Shoal. China claims 90% of the South China Sea, overlapping with the exclusive economic zones of Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Beijing seized the Scarborough Shoal in 2012, forcing Filipino fishermen to travel further for smaller catches. The Philippine Coast Guard and Fisheries Bureau personnel discovered the floating barrier on a routine patrol on Friday. China's embassy in Manila did not immediately respond to a request for comment.
Just hours after the Philippine National Security Advisor vowed to take action, the Philippine Coast Guard said it had removed the floating cordon on Monday. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has called the barrier a necessary measure. Electric vehicles now in the crosshairs of a new trade barrier between China and Europe. As the European Union is still deciding whether to slap tariffs on Chinese-made electric cars, Germany is torn. The nation's transport minister said the tariffs could spark a chain reaction and put the German economy at risk. But the economy minister shared a different view. He welcomed the tariffs with open arms, saying action must be taken if there's enough evidence to justify it. Earlier this month, the EU launched an investigation into Chinese electric vehicles flooding the global market. The prices of those cars are well under average, thanks to state subsidies from Beijing. Here's the EU trade chief giving an update on the probe on Saturday.
What has been announced is a launch of anti-subsidy investigation, which is going to be facts-based investigation, and which will provide sufficient opportunities also for engagement with both Chinese authorities and Chinese industry.
During a 4-day trip to China, he spoke about the possibility of Europe taking a more assertive stance against unfair trade practices, though he also committed to continuing trade with the Chinese regime. He called on Beijing to step up cooperation and move the relationship forward. According to the commission, the probe has 13 months to wrap up and take action. Turning now to human rights in China, a university professor walks us through what the U.S. has deemed the Chinese Communist Party's past and ongoing cases of genocide. Here's more.
Over the weekend, the International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom held a convention in Washington, D.C. The event sought to raise awareness for the long-forgotten genocides still haunting the minds of many survivors today. Sen Nai is a mechanical engineering professor at the Catholic University of America. While presenting historical images and statistics, he spoke about Communist China's past and ongoing genocides.
They understand that Communist Party culture cannot survive in China on the land of divine. So they systematically destroyed Chinese culture, Chinese traditional value, as I mentioned today.
In 1966, then Chinese leader Mao Zedong spearheaded a decade-long political campaign known as the Cultural Revolution. With Mao's teachings in hand, mobilized youth called the Red Guards began to destroy historical relics and statues en masse. All traditions were condemned. Teachers and intellectuals were interrogated, beaten, and even killed in public. An estimate of up to 80 million people perished under Mao's leadership. Fast forward to the late 1990s, another nationwide persecution was underway, this time targeting a spiritual group, Falun Gong practitioners.
The persecution of Falun Gong per se involves 70 to 100 million people. Each person has family members, good friends, which probably involve 300 or 400 million Chinese being direct or indirectly being affected or persecuted by this Communist Party.
Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, is a spiritual doctrine consisting of 5 gentle, slow-moving exercises. Practitioners follow the core teachings of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. In July of 1999, the CCP launched a nationwide persecution against the practice, even creating a police branch to conduct surveillance and arrest. Millions have been imprisoned. Over 100,000 have been tortured or abused in custody, with thousands dying from torture. Many have been murdered on demand to supply the nation's organ transplant market. But according to Nai, a spiritual awakening is happening in China. A large number of people began to openly renounce their membership in the Chinese Communist Party and its affiliated youth groups.
This forms the fertile grounds of a civilized society that definitely will bring good to the Chinese race, and with the least casualty loss of economy or human life.
As of now, more than 400 million people have quit the Chinese Communist Party.
The head of Hong Kong's top journalists group is about to spend 5 days behind bars. Ronson Chan is the chairman of the Hong Kong Journalists Association. He was sentenced Monday in a case critics are calling another blow to media freedom in the financial hub.
Everyone can see what is the rule of law, and today everyone will see how the court handles this case. I think everyone has their own way of judgment.
Chan was detained in September last year when police say he failed to hand over his personal ID card. He told the court that he had asked the plainclothes police to show them their warrant cards before handing over his own document. Chan was on his way to report on a story at the time. The erosion of media freedom in the city has come into the spotlight in recent years. Beijing imposed a national security law to crush dissent in 2019, following Hong Kong's massive pro-democracy protests that year. It now ranks 140th out of 180 countries and territories in Reporters Without Borders' latest World Press Freedom Index.
I hope that every journalist of us still have to stand firm for our job, for our duty, and we are still trying to cover the truth and the news story for the Hong Kong and the world.
Chan pleaded not guilty. He was granted bail after his sentencing, and his lawyer said he would appeal. The journalist cannot leave Hong Kong and had to surrender his travel documents. A Chinese dissident is pleading for help from an airport in Taiwan. Chen Ximing has become known for posting pictures on social media to commemorate the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. But after getting detained in China, a human rights group is urging Taiwan to help Chen seek asylum in the U.S. or Canada, even though the island doesn't have a formal refugee policy. Let's zoom in.
I wanted to seek political asylum in the United States, but I couldn't. I can only take the opportunity to pass through Taiwan and seek a short and safe stay in Taiwan.
That's what Chen Siming told Taiwan broadcaster in an interview at the Taoyuan airport. In May, authorities in southern China detained Chen. It was because of a tweet he posted commemorating the June 4th crackdown on pro-democracy students at Beijing's Tiananmen Square in 1989. Inside China, public memorials honoring those protesters are likely to attract police attention and end in participants getting detained or arrested. But what happens next for Chen may prove complicated. Taiwan does not have a formal refugee policy and has become increasingly wary of security risks posed by China. The Chinese regime claims Taiwan as its own territory despite never having ruled the island. Chen says he was aware of the risks.
Taiwan is a democratic and free country. It is safer here than Thailand and Laos.
It's unclear how Chen was able to travel to Taiwan. NTD has not been able to reach him for comment.
The world's most indebted company is sinking further into trouble. Chinese property giant Evergrande's stock price took a plunge on Monday morning, falling as much as 24% in early Hong Kong trading hours. The tumble came after a warning from the company that it can't issue new bonds for now, as an investigation looks into one of its subsidiaries. Here's the latest.
Group firm Hengda Real Estate said last month that it was being probed by regulators over suspected violations regarding the disclosure of information. On Monday, Evergrande said that meant it did not qualify to issue new bonds. The news comes just a week after police detained some staff at the company's wealth management unit. There was no detail on how many were held or what the charges were. Now the turmoil piles pressure on Evergrande's restructuring plans. Earlier this month, it delayed a decision on what to do about its offshore debts, saying creditors needed more time to think. The firm needs approval from 75% of the holders of each debt class to proceed with restructuring. But sentiment on the whole sector remains feverish, with major rivals like Country Garden also teetering close to default. The crisis in the property sector, which accounts for about a quarter of China's economy, has sent tremors through global markets. Investors worry what would happen if major firms went under, and have so far been unimpressed by Beijing's moves to prop up the sector.
That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for 2 years. Here's what to look out for in our second half. State versus private. China is home to the most state-owned enterprises of any nation in the world. But what role do the entities really play? Plus, growing calls for tighter U.S. export controls on China. What could they mean for the future of diplomacy between Washington and Beijing? We welcome John Pelson, author of Wireless Wars and former Chief Convergence Officer for British Telecom, back on the show for details. The full episode is available on our partner platform, Epic TV. To sign up, click the link down below. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you tomorrow.